Okay. Oh, here comes Linda, my wife. All right. Hi, babe.
Hello.
Okay, so why don't we get started? We are pleased and honored to have Amy Chesler with us. She is the author of a book called Working for Justice, One Family's Tale of Murder, Betrayal, and Healing. And this happened right here in California in the area of Calabasas in September of 2007. And Hadass Winnick, who was murdered by her son, uh, created a whole shocking and devastating effect not only on the community but certainly on the family. So Hadassah's daughter, Amy, who is a blogger, uh, we the book really chronicles what she did and how she went on this journey to try and achieve justice for herself and for her mom. So without that, any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Amy. We are so pleased to have you here, and take it away, Amy.
Thank you so much. I am beyond honored. Actually, I think we were technically members of a .rel way back when. So yes, uh, yeah. So the book, many of you probably, I mean, haven't read it yet. So I won't. What I do discuss won't give anything away. Um, but yes, Gary mentioned, um, my I'm sorry. There's a clicking noise on the table.
Helen, I think you need to go on mute if you're
Yeah.
going to be typing. Yeah.
If you don't mind, whoever was typing, it was just I heard it kind of loudly, and
There she goes. Yeah, me too.
I apologize. Yeah. So as Gary mentioned, unfortunately, we had. I often start these things by saying that I am a survivor of domestic violence. My mother, however, is not. And in essence, the book Working for Justice takes, but each reader on the journey of the night my mom was murdered, which was September 25th, 2007, which ironically became, and maybe not ironically, but very coincidentally became the National Murder Victims Remembrance Day in all of America. And I didn't find that out until about, I think actually after my brother was convicted. And so it kind of became, my mission has evolved with this book, and I'll kind of discuss that over the last years, but especially actually over the last several months since its release. So in essence, again, the story takes the reader on that evening from September 25th, 2007, through the years it took to convict her admittedly guilty murderer. As Gary said, it was my brother. He was extremely abusive, and I kind of chronicle that throughout the book a bit, give instances of his behavior, but he was extremely abusive for probably over 10, 15 years. And as I kind of express in the book, and I, again, won't give too much away, but there were just so many visits from so many different social service organizations, and we just never really got the help we needed. Now is a much different time. We have so many different more resources. There are so many different conversations starting, and that was one of my purposes with my book, to be honest, is I need mom's death to not be in vain, and I need conversations like this to happen in all kinds of areas with all different people, because there are so many lessons to be learned. My mom was a teacher from Los Angeles. Well, actually, she was from Israel originally, but she moved here quite young, and she was an LAUSD teacher forever. And she had, one of the first questions I get is, well, what about the parenting? Yes, and my dad was absent, as I explained in the book, but my mom really was. She was an educator. She had her master's in child development. She knew the things to do. It's just that she didn't quite have the resources to back her up. So I think it's an extremely important detail of our story. And, there's so many stories like ours. Ours is just one of many. I dedicate the book to well, you generally have to go from memory, but I have it sitting in my lap. I dedicate it to anyone who has ever felt alone in their experiences, because I think that that is one of the mechanisms that so many of us stay in the positions that hurt us, either if it's an abusive situation or if maybe the mental health system isn't serving us correctly. It's because we often feel alone. So I think the conversation is just pinnacle to taking steps to improving our society and our kind of just the way we serve each other with our systems. So I also go on to explain or to dedicate it to Mom for loving me so fiercely that her presence still remains. Makes me choke up, but quite one of my very first, I eventually, I explained in the book that I went to Calabasas High School. I eventually taught there as well. But my first book reviews were actually from my English teachers from high school, and they all said, it was a love letter of my mom, and that touched me so deeply because I didn't really realize that's what it was, but it meant a lot that was how people took it. I also lace in the book throughout it diary entries of my mom's too. When I turned 17, she gave me a diary that she had kept throughout her relationship with my dad. And so I really try to bring her back with our story, because I think that is something that's missing in the true crime realm. Some of my reviews were not so positive because they were like, well, this isn't a true crime book. This isn't normal. And they're kind of missing the point that it's a memoir. So, true crime is kind of all the rage nowadays. And just the sentence kind of makes me sick. But quite honestly, Mom was a fan of true crime, and that's a loose term fan, but, she experienced a loss that she believed was to murder when she was in her early 20s. And so I think she kind of was attracted to the genre in general. Just for healing purposes, if you will, and also just because I think awareness is the first step to change, as I've said before, and I'll probably say a million times. Bless you if you sneezed. It's kind of evolved. My mission with this, as I mentioned, is I never really thought my first book would be a true crime book. I've always wanted to be a writer. If I look back, the only thing I ever steadfastly ever wanted to be a mom, 100% of my life was a mom. But other than that, if you'd asked me at any point, I probably would have said I want to be a writer. And they say, write what you know. I had no idea what I knew until it smacked me upside the head, quite literally. It took me about, and I like to discuss this in my meetings, in my book talks, because I think everybody has a story. And I think it's essential, if you're a storyteller, for you to get that out. We have the onus of responsibility. So I felt that as well. Welcome. I felt that as well in getting this book out. I had to, because I am a storyteller, like I said, but I believe in connection. I believe in community, and I believe that community kind of heals all wounds, if you will, and kind of what I explained in the book. How I even made it through my experiences is the community my mom left me with. Look at this, a temple we attended decades ago, and each meeting leads to another meeting, and I'm just so grateful for all of the support. It took me about 14 years to get the book out. It took me getting a divorce because I realized I healed in a way that made my ex-husband a bit uncomfortable. And I realized I needed to live authentically and heal my family for my children. So I have 2 lovely children now. And it took quitting education and having them to realize and pursue my dreams. So when I started writing this book, I was very lost. It's very personal to me. So I didn't really know how to frame it correctly. And it took a really good team to help me kind of get the story out. But something I like to explain to my book club meetings, again, because I think all of you have stories. Obviously, if you live long enough, you've got plenty to tell people. And I think that it's important to realize that, and it's a hard step. Everyone says, well, I've got this idea for a book, or I have this memoir idea. Something really important to realize, and I can, if anyone needs any information about this afterwards, I'm happy to email a format, but you don't actually have to write a whole nonfiction book to sell it. You actually have to just fill out, in essence, there's a format to it. And is anybody not interested in this, or is anybody interested in finding out? Because I don't want to explain this process. I won't take too long, but I love empowering my readers too, because I just think that it's important for us to get our stories out. But again, you don't have to write a whole nonfiction book to sell it. You just have to write a proposal, in essence, and find somebody that believes in your story. So I wrote a proposal. I found an agent and I found a publisher, and they helped kind of get it out. And it was a whirlwind. I sold my book at the beginning of COVID, probably a week after my divorce was finalized. And I now then had to write a book without Starbucks or anywhere to go. And it was an extremely cathartic experience. Something that it's a tenet of all my writing and all my speaking engagements and everything I do. I think the only way out of trauma, of grief, of anything is through. So I'm trying to help people, no matter what people's stories are. I know everybody is touched by some sort of grief or loss or trauma. And the beautiful thing about this book is all the stories that I've received in the process. I obviously had to do a lot of therapy. I had to do a lot of therapy to get this out, but also to prepare myself for the aftermath, leaving your story open to people to kind of consume as if, it's just a story. And some people do that, has been, eye-opening. And like I said, some reviews are pretty negative. They're not very happy with my very personal telling of my story. But it's kind of launched me down the mission and down the path to kind of change the true crime realm and the genre. I want to, it's okay. We should be telling these stories because it's important to revive victims. However, it needs to be, we need to thoughtfully create these stories and also thoughtfully consume these stories. And that's kind of become one of my missions as well. I plan to help other people tell their stories as well, people that are victims of domestic violence, people that are victims of murder. One of the most common things I receive feedback about in my book is sibling abuse. In fact, one of the people I was most scared of reading this book, my uncle, my dad's brother, I was pretty honest about my dad. I didn't really sugarcoat his absence or his involvement in our family, the path our family took. And I was a little worried about how my dad was deceased by the time I wrote it and it was published. So I was really worried about my dad's brother and his siblings. And my uncle actually said it was so beautiful. And it taught me the word sibling abuse. And I realized what I faced at the hands of your dad as well. So it's been so cathartic to help other people name what they've been through or even talk about what they've been through. In this process, some pretty incredible things have happened. In every book club meeting I ever do, every single one, which I've done a lot at this point, at least 1 to 2 other people have been co-victims of murder. Now that means, obviously there are victims of murder, people, but the people that are peripherally touched by that murder are called co-victims. And it's so common. It's even more common for people to be abused by their siblings. 50% of children in America are considered to have been abused at some point, emotionally, physically. And something I often talk about in these talks is, well, what's abuse then? And that's a really hard topic to kind of define. I don't think our legal system does a good job at it. And that's why the people like my brother fall through the crack. But abuse can be the misuse of any sort of power over someone else to manipulate them, to gain some sort of satisfaction or anything really. And anything can be weaponized in abuse as well. So it's just been very eye-opening to be able to share my experiences and name all these things that I've been through. And each time I tell my story and each time I share it in a book club and each time I I recently did an episode of Evil Lives Here on investigation discovery. And each time I hear myself master that story a little bit more, even if I tear up, which I have to, my mom was exceptional. You know, it helps me master those feelings and be able to feel like I can help other people as well. I have built a beautiful community out of telling my story too. I created a grief podcast, and it's still slow and steady in the beginnings of it, but just the community that I'm building and the people that are able to reach out to me. I've gotten people reaching out to me from the Tree of Life synagogue shooting. I had a few serial killer survivors from the 80s that have, done just, documentaries that have reached out to me. And there's just this kind of sick, sad club we all kind of belong to. But there's this beauty in connection and knowing that we're not alone. I've been very validated in telling my story. I'm very blessed and honored and privileged. I know there's a privilege in the amplification I've received too. A lot of people are murdered and they don't even know who did it. And they, there is an immense fight to just even be heard about the crime. Again, without going too much into the exact details of the book, I reveal at the end, the system, our system, really, there were just a lot of travesties through the process. It took years to convict my brother because he exacted legal abuse over us. And I mean legal abuse as in the fact that he used the legal system to abuse us, but he also did it legally. It was allowed. And at the very end of it, he ended up receiving 15 to life. He, unfortunately, though, in our recent leadership and changes in politics and stuff like that, just the way the prisons are governed, his sentence has been reduced in essence. He had his first parole hearing already. So his sentence was, and I know I'm hopping around a little bit and I'm sorry. He received a sentence of 15 to life. Again, he got an extra time for the method that he, murdered my mother. That was reduced, that was taken away. And he basically, it was only 9 years since conviction, I actually had to face him at a parole hearing. So it was absolutely awful. It was traumatic. And it's something I like to bring to light, especially as we step into this zone of being co-victims as a country, when there's shootings and there are things like that, and we're expecting justice for the perpetrator, and for us, really, there isn't a lot. And often, if there is, it's temporary. So it was 9.5 years after conviction. We did it the first parole hearing. And then, hold on one second. I'm sorry, I mentioned that my children were home. They can't hear me, so they don't know what I'm saying, but I can hear them. And
that's all right. Don't worry about it.
Doing something that is quiet. And give me one moment, if you don't mind. I very much apologize. This was
okay. It's okay.
One moment.
Haven't we all read the book? I mean, she's talking about she doesn't want to give away stuff, but I think we've all read the book, right?
Yeah.
Right. Has everyone read it? No, Ellen, you haven't?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I thought we all read it. So,
Ellen, I can give you the book if you want. I have it here.
Yeah. Well,
you're muted.
Mute,
all my pages are dog-eared because I was taking notes.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that.
Okay.
And they're old enough to be left alone. Don't worry. I forgot where I was, which happens a lot.
You were talking about the
parole.
Oh yes, yes. In this zone right now, it is done during. I mean, I can't speak via Zoom, and so I signed on. There were all technical difficulties, of course. I almost actually, and quite honestly, I'm actually already writing my next book because of all the things that have just happened, even in the last couple months. But I was actually cleared for the wrong parole hearing too. I got an email with the wrong inmate number. I mean, I have paper trail for all of it, and I had to catch that. So if I hadn't, I would have been cleared for the wrong. I wouldn't even have been able to speak. He basically came on the camera, and this is all recorded, and this is just how our system kind of plays out. He basically threatened my life, my kids' lives. He said he has stabbed 90 more people since being in prison. Yeah, I mean, he basically said, you know, I went in being a bad guy, and I've only become worse. And those were virtually his exact words. And then, you know, I never really got to do a statement. This is my statement. Someone said, you know, you get to speak at the parole hearing, just read him your whole damn book. And I basically wrote a truncated version, and you know, right before it was my turn to speak, he said, well, do I have to listen? And the person on the parole board said, actually, technically, legally, no. And so he got up and walked out.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so I just, you know, what I like to bring, I talk about this because number one, it's traumatic, and you know, it helps me to get it out. But also number two, there is so much power people, you know, some people not. Some people are imprisoned, you know, wrongly for years. However, on the flip side, and I do believe that from where we come from, you know, my brother is a white man from Calabasas. I do believe there is a level of that affects how the system treats him. And the privileges he receives in the system. So yeah, he actually at the very end, before he got up and walked out, he said, do I have any extra powers? I heard there was something in COVID that had been allowed for people. And he said, and the parole board member said, yes, you can actually postpone your hearing for another 6 months, year, or 2 years. And he said, great, I'll see you in 2 years. And that was a year and a half ago. So, so within 15 years of my mom's murder, I will have done 2 parole board hearings, you know, motions or whatever they're called. And then umpteen different trial, I mean, not trial hearings, but proceedings that were just appalling. So I've realized in getting this all out there, I have another mission. I do really want to enact legislative change. I do want to change the, you know, how abuse is determined, how inmates can utilize the system to abuse the abused still. There are just so many things, you know, statute of limitations, things like that, that I really do think there's so many things that have to change. And I'm a very proud American as well. I don't say this with any distaste. My mom was from Israel, but gosh, she only bought Fords, and she was just so proud to be here. And I want to help these systems evolve to become the country that she deserved to be, you know, homed by. So I just feel it sounds weird. And going off of what you said, Gary, you said, I think you said, I'm excited or something. And then you said, well, maybe not that word. And I feel weird when I say, I'm so blessed and grateful. But I am, because what's happened has already happened. But the opportunities I've been given to keep reviving my mom, to keep bringing awareness to the things that, you know, that failed us. It's very moving and empowering to be able to tell our story, and to do these things for myself and for other people as well. One of the things I often hear from are women like me who had an abusive older brother. Very often, you know, I thought I was the only one, which is so empowering. And fulfilling to know that I'm making a difference in that way. But I also get an innumerable number of messages from women who are mothers who explain that they have had an abusive child. And it's I think it's a faction of society we don't really even know exists. We don't realize it can exist. And it fills my heart to know that I can add to these conversations and add awareness. I just don't want it to stop there. And I am kind of promising that I'm not going to. This book is just the very first step to all the things that I want to do for victims and co-victims. I generally, that is kind of what I discuss on my side. I don't know if you guys have any questions.
Definitely.
I have several, but let me start off with one particular question, and then I'll let the group ask you potentially about specific items. You mentioned Mick. He was your connection to law enforcement.
Yes.
Yes. And there are several times that law enforcement, it seemed upside down. The incident with the automobile where you were almost arrested.
Yes.
And the incident when he came in and said, well, Rory decided that he would try to implicate you in the
Right.
murder.
Yes.
You planned it. Yeah.
Yes.
Planned it. So what was your interaction with law enforcement? It sounds like Mick was kind of a supporter. Was he at the parole hearing, for example?
He was at every hearing. He's wonderful. In fact, we're still friends. When I filmed Evil Lives Here recently, he didn't want to do it with me. They wanted him to, but he provided them all information, all the pictures, everything they needed. He's wonderful. I actually wrote a Chicken Soup for the Soul story about him because and it's weird because I think people are I got a lot of questions like, do you speak ill of the police in your book? And I think two truths can be true at the same time. I think there can be fabulous police. I think there can be bad police. I think that there can be a whole system that needs work and a system that also works in some ways. And I think that I actually wanted to be a detective when I was a kid. That was one of my things I fancied. I love a good detective novel. But I donated 3,000 hours of my time in high school to the sheriff's department that was arresting my brother at the very same time. And I've always had a good relationship with law enforcement. I was always taught to respect and honor, and so it's weird because I do very much respect and honor the individuals that I've had to deal with in the police department, and specifically the detective who was on the case. But clearly, still,
Me.
The system is flawed.
What?
The system is flawed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a lot of good people in the system that want to make it better, but it's still flawed. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Beverly.
You talked later in the book, I guess when you were trying to get him more years, that he had physically abused you. But you never talked about that earlier, did you? I don't remember. Did your mother know about that?
She knew some things. There was an incident in the book where I explained, he just came up behind me and kicked me between the legs.
Yeah, I remember that.
She saw that. She kicked him out. And he was out of the house for a few months, and then he would, grovel his way back in. He also sexually abused me when I was a child, when I was younger. And I kind of disclose a bit more about that in the TV show. I've had to really chew through some of this abuse, and it's taken me time. People that hear my story, I get a lot of people that digest my story in different ways. There's a podcast and there's a book and this, and they'll say, well, but you didn't really do that in that one. And I'll be like, yeah, it's taken me time, guys. You're watching me live heal. So no, my mom didn't know about the worst of the abuse. And the nature of abuse, and that's why one thing I like to say, I don't have any regrets necessarily. It's my biggest life regret that I didn't report it to my mother. However, that's also victim blaming, and I've learned that.
Right.
That's inherently in abuse. You just you think it's your fault. You think you're and that's the shame is what kind of keeps you in the silence. So unfortunately, no, but my mom and I had so many candid conversations about things like that, my mom was the mom that everybody went to have the tough conversation. If they couldn't do it with their parents, they would do it with her and kind of get some footing and then move to their parents eventually. So it's a shame I did not, but no, I did not. And I don't think I knew what it was then.
Right. That's right.
other.
I know it's a story that this may sound very naive, but I don't expect a story like this from a Jewish family.
Right.
I mean, maybe that just sounds so naive, but you know, maybe I grew up in this little bubble, but it just everything that you went through, just unbelievable.
You know, I think that we represent so many different factions, but many of them are factions, and everybody's really factioned in all of that. We are all of it compounded, and I think that we were kind of always not always, but over the years just developed into this perfect recipe for disaster, and that's why I like to tell our story too, so other people see the warning signs, not only of there are like serial killer warning signs and very, hard set kind of psychological warning signs. However, you don't know the warning signs of just family trauma unfolding. My mom was handicapped at the same time as my brother dropping out of high school. So just all of these things kind of compounding at the same time. And I think I hear a tiny knock at my door. So I'm going to see. Yes, my love. No, I'll give it to you in a sec. Okay. I love you. Sorry. Yes. So I think I lost. Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Neighbors, friends, acquaintances, did anybody else, was they afraid of Rory, or?
Oh yeah.
You?
I'm sorry, I missed I think I spoke over that last half of your question, or what?
Did they talk to you about it?
Yes, lots of people were afraid of him. My aunt didn't want him around for holiday things, sometimes, if you lose it, like Jesse's just not invited. People didn't know how to handle it, and they just wouldn't, it was very isolating for us. My mom lost a lot of friends because they would say things they thought she should be doing. And she'd be like, well, I'm trying. And then they'd be like, well, I can't watch this anymore. Goodbye. Kind of thing. And, it just was a different time too. People turned their backs more than they talked about things, I think. Also, something that people don't realize is, I get a lot of comments on the internet like, well, what about her teachers? And didn't anybody see this? And you have to realize in the way I was developing too, he was so far gone almost from a young age. Like, there were deep issues already, probably when he was in 4th grade or so. Very, very deep issues. Like, in terms of just not connecting with any students, not connecting with any teachers. It was more of like, well, maybe he should be homeschooled. That was what the school just, so it was always like, well, maybe you should be doing something a little bit different, because one of the first questions is, well, what was your mom like? Was she really mean? Was she, people just assumed she was abusive to kind of foster that, but there's so many facets in the raising of a child. And I did so good at covering up my needs and getting really good grades and being involved in everything that no one really suspected that I needed help or that there was an issue at home. He was just a problem child, if you will.
Often we compartmentalize. If it's a bad situation, you escape in other ways. And that's sometimes how, one deals with things. And I can understand, it's so subtle too.
Yes.
It's so subtle that, some people might say, oh, well, no, it isn't really that bad. But.
And that's like abuse too. It's the subtlety of the building of a cycle of abuse. It starts small, and then it starts into a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. It's the same kind of nature. And, you don't realize it's abuse until you go, wow, that, and it's almost a snowball effect, if you will.
Well, I also think that when your home life is chaotic, you chose to go outside your home life and be the perfect kid who everybody thought was wonderful, so that you got a lot of praise and a lot of kudos from the outside.
Yeah.
My guess is that if your mom was spending all of this time on trying to somehow contain your brother, it was hard to have a lot of time left over for you.
Absolutely. And that was something I know that it was born from, the praise outside, fine. I was actually kind of like I was a really, really nerdy kid. I wasn't really liked by a lot of people. I was, kind of a little bit quiet, and I was the kid always raising my hand to answer the questions, and my peers didn't love me that much. I was real annoying to them. But so it was more like I wanted to be better for my mom. I wanted to alleviate any pressure I could. And I had that burden. Like I gave that burden to myself. And I don't think I ever remember my mom, grades, they were never an issue, but like I never got harped on about things like that. I explained in the book, I got a lot more freedom than my brother. He got more lax kind of boundaries because he pushed them so hard and so violently, if you will. But yeah, I definitely, and I have 2 children now. I realize you kind of have to be different parents to different children because they need different things. Even as a teacher, sometimes you need to kind of teach your students a little bit differently, give them a little bit different things. Yeah, and my mom, it's just interesting to think about how I think my dad's lack of parenting was probably even more formative on him than my mom's actual parenting. And something else that I think I was going to mention last question, but I'll mention really quickly. My mom and I always very much deeply connected when he was gone, whether he was in the army, I think supposedly, I still don't know if he was really in there, or jail or prison or a girlfriend's house or wherever, we deeply connected and communicated, and kind of healed our space in that time. So yeah, it was just an very interesting journey, and not the general journey of a Jewish family, like you said.
No.
But I do think there are elements from it that are represented a lot, yeah. Enmeshment. I mean,
there's a lot of stuff in the Orthodox community.
Oh, definitely, yes.
So,
yeah. But yeah, no, I just think that we were kind of like such a like I said, perfect recipe for disaster, to be honest.
What are you gonna do when he gets paroled?
Oh Lord,
I don't know how you could stay there.
I hope that's just not a thing that ever happens. I hope I'm doing enough to bring awareness. I'm gonna start a petition before the next parole hearing. I'm gonna bring as much. I mean, I know people in politics now. I literally am doing everything I can where if he is, there is going to be a large uproar and lots to happening. I don't know. And yes, I would love to move away. Yeah, that's just a whole other thing. That after divorce, that's very hard to leave the area.
Yeah. Pretty scary.
Yeah. So yes, very, very, very scary. Especially, yes, at the parole board hearing, he actually recited my ex-husband's address and said he could have my whole family killed. And yes, that is again recorded. Yeah. And the appalling thing I didn't mention before was at the very end of all of that parole board hearing, the parole board actually said, this is off, by the way, this is off, offline or whatever, they've stopped recording it. They were like, just so you know, it is a very high possibility that what he said about stabbing 90 more people is very likely. Like, just he's already in there. They said he could not be lying. Like, that's what they basically they basically said, if he's in there and once he's behind bars and he's been convicted, it's not jail. So if someone, in my book, I explained how somebody actually turned him in for trying to get him to kill me because I didn't hold up my end of the bargain. I actually got that letter when I was filming Evil Lives Here. They gave it to me to read, and it was shocking. Read it, because it was just, he had laid out like stalking plans for me. Like, if he doesn't listen to you, yeah, and I mean, no, there are no consequences to this, because if you're not in jail trying to get like less time or get out or whatever, once they're in prison, they're just gonna turn away and kind of say, I didn't see that. I don't know who did it. Yeah. So there's so many things I've learned in this process. The DMV scene, even the APB not being released, taken off the car. It's so crazy that all these things could actually happen. Especially to one person or family.
It was a travesty. It was a travesty.
Yes, and it still remains to be, I think, and that's why I just can't give up talking about it. you know, as uncomfortable as it might make some people, you know, it's necessary.
Well, it's eye-opening, and we need, you know, those who, you know, have not been touched, at least personally, within this realm. People need to know, and you're doing a real service by sharing all of this.
I think that you know, a point of prevention and proactivity rather than reactivity is listening to those minority voices. I hate to say it like that, but victims are a minority in the grand scheme of things in society. So I think we bring the perspective, you know, society doesn't need to be designed around the majority, to be honest. I think to be a more open, loving, accepting society, we need to hear those stories a bit more, especially right now while we're finding that balance, to be honest. And yeah, it's been extremely eye-opening for me too. And as soon as I let it out, just to receive that flood of, to know that I'm not alone. You know, I always write back saying, it breaks my heart to hear that you've gone through something similar that I have gone through, but I know the tiny bit of solace that you're receiving knowing that, you know, you're not alone. I mean, in this process, I blabbed at a park once about my family history, and the woman I was blabbing about goes, you know, my dad murdered my mom. I'm in a group, I know, it's crazy. She goes, and I'm in a group called Children of Murdered Parents on Facebook. You need to be in it. And there's a huge group of us. I mean, it's just crazy that these people exist. I was going to say this before. I've known somebody for over 20 years. My old boss, he asked for a bunch of books. He was going to deliver them to Arnold Schwarzenegger. He takes them, and as he takes them from me, he says, you know, I thank you for what you're doing. My dad was murdered, and just you telling this has lightened me a little. And I said, well, when? And he said, oh, about 22 years ago. And I was like, excuse me? I've known you this whole time. I knew his brothers, his sisters. I mean, I intimately had conversations about life and upbringing, and he had never said his dad was murdered. And my expressing this and letting it out has just gave him that tiny bit of ability to say it to me, at least. It's just crazy to me that people live with these burdens. And I think that, Beverly, to hop off your comment or to say, I think it probably happens way more than we think. It's just people don't.
Probably right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably right.
Lorraine?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First of all, I was so totally appalled that the trial took so long to get, you know, that the whole thing took so long to get resolved. I know that a defendant has the right to a speedy trial. Why doesn't the victim have a right to a speedy trial?
Right.
I mean, that so appalled me that you can manipulate by firing your attorneys, by going off your meds, going on your meds, going off your meds, going, you know, I mean, it just.
Isn't it shocking?
It just blew my mind. I can't help it.
Yes, and so someone on the parole board told me he's smart. And I said, ooh, he's not that smart. And he said, no, you have to understand he's very smart at manipulation. And some people, and especially the people who are going to be actually exacting these sorts of crimes, are the people that would be utilizing. And that's why I said legal abuse. It's quite literal legal abuse, utilizing the legal system, and it's allowed. It's
right. So I guess my question is, I mean, obviously the legal system is broken in some ways for this to be allowed. What about the parole system? Because if he's out there threatening to kill you, I would hope that the parole board would say, I don't think this guy's ready to be released.
Well, should say that.
I would hope.
What they said was, and oh God, absolutely. I mean, it's shocking. And when he said, oh, so I can postpone this for up to 2 years, and they said yes. In essence, at that moment, they said, you know, just sir, based on your behavior, you would have gotten another 15 years right now. However, that's crazy. 15 years still. I think about it and I'm doing the math. I'm like, okay, so I have 12 before I start getting parole board hearing notifications, and there's still just this cyclical sort of event, you know, it's appalling how the system allows it. And when they can see the holes in it, they definitely utilize it. And
But as he spouts all of this venom, I'm hoping that means that they wouldn't release him.
Yes, well, he actually asked for a transfer up north to be closer to. I have a family member that kind of supports him because he's lied and said that we were abused as children, and they wouldn't even read my book. They've refused. And so he asked to be transferred up there, and he said, maybe I'll take some self-help classes and be a whole different person in a couple years. That's what he said to them. And I'm just hoping, you know, he is smart technically in manipulation. I wonder what sort of conversation that'll be. I'm hoping he's just as angry. Quite honestly, it was very traumatic at that parole board hearing. I'm just hoping it happens again at this
Right.
point.
Right.
I mean,
Sure.
but yeah, it's crazy to think that he can even, there was a death threat. There was an actual death threat with my address involved in that meeting. So the fact that that could happen on a recording, and I don't even know, that's where I'm like, maybe I'm not doing enough, or is there another resource I could be employing? I met a man who's running for mayor. I like tell everybody my family story. I'm like, here, is there something you can do? It's crazy. I actually just direct messaged George Gascon the other day. I was like, help, this is ridiculous.
Oh yeah, he'll help. He'll
Yeah,
let him
right.
out.
I know. He's the one that took away the extra 1 year for what
Yeah, he'll let him out.
Crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy. And that's yeah.
I don't understand how anybody could get out. I mean, is it because of his youth and the age that he's going to get out in 15 years or whatever?
Well, his sentence was 15 to life. So technically, he took a plea deal because he basically exhausted me. It was so many years of hearings and this and that and this. And he goes, the DA said, you know, we could offer him a plea deal, second degree instead of first degree. And he said, look, anybody in California, if they have to life in their sentence, they don't get out. This was obviously before many changes. And I was like, okay, it doesn't really make me feel comfortable because we had 20 plus years of abuse, right? It's very documented that he planned things out, but he still received 15 to life. So technically it was 15 was his minimum. Something people don't know about, especially in the state of California. Now, some states don't even have parole. They just have, you get a sentence, you do it, and that's that.
Right.
In California, you actually have to serve up to 85% of your lowest term before you start having parole board hearing allowances. Like you can be up for the hearing. So that's just, you know, that's the way the cookie crumbled, I guess. It's just the way it works here. There's definitely a learning curve to all of this and knowing how it all works out. And it's quite shocking. Anyway.
Tony?
Yes, Tony, did you have a?
Yeah, in reading your book, in the very beginning, when you were talking about the timeline of what you were doing, what your brother was doing, of the actual murder, it sounded like you had a lot of guilt that you didn't come home, you were on a dumb date. But everybody, when there's a tragedy, looks back and says, what if? But it doesn't usually provide the solution to things. I'm wondering, you've had therapy, the book you said was cathartic for you to get some of this off your chest. Time has come between you and the horrific event of your mother's murder. Do you still have any of that guilt that you could have prevented this, which you couldn't have?
No way.
I love that question. And I love how you phrase it. Thank you very much for doing it so thoughtfully and carefully. You know, I think I held a good deal in the beginning. I don't think it was consuming me. I knew that this was my brother's doing. I knew that. However, there were always like, well, maybe I could have it could have been a month later, a year later, or whatever. And someone once said, you know, what if you were there and you showed up and he killed you too? And I said,
Right.
Oh, shit. Yeah, you're right. What if that was, you know, and that hit me. So what I learned in sharing is that sometimes there are also solutions in the perspectives you gain from people. And it's not only cathartic just to let it go, but also just to receive more from other people as well. So yeah, no, I don't, there's regrets in terms of not reporting things to my mom. But again, I catch myself very quickly at that point and say, God, almost every victim does it. And if you look around, and even women coming out and reporting are still relatively shamed in society to a certain degree. So who knows how things would have played out. And yes, I've released all my guilt. Yeah, definitely.
But don't you think that maybe part of not reporting stuff to your mom was to ease her burden?
Right.
Because if you report it to her, then it's one more thing she has to deal with.
Yeah.
And
one more thing he's done and added to the list.
Right.
And my absorbing it, yeah, I just absorbed it, I guess, for both of us, if you will. But it's funny because she was like the biggest advocate. She was, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now too, because I learned by example. So it breaks my heart. Like I've definitely, what I tell people from abuse, you do not owe. I hate people in the Christian, and not to say this, but I hate the Christian idea that you have to forgive people. You have, it's for you. No, bullshit. Sorry. But abuse like that, I have to forgive myself, the child that I shame a bit for not reporting. I have to forgive that little girl who was hurt. To a certain degree, but I also just have to give her grace in general. And so all the forgiveness, I believe, has to come, it's personal. The work, you don't really owe anyone anything except digging into your stuff.
You're a victim. You're a victim. I mean, that's really the bottom line.
It's so funny because I've heard from so many people, well, you know what? You're a survivor, not a victim. And I say, no, I'm both. And that's okay to be both. When I deny the word victim, you deny the victim experience that was put on me. I was forced to experience a lot of things. And when I don't own that word or say, yes, I was a victim or am a victim, it kind of just doesn't give that little person grace in all of that too. So yeah, it's important to say that.
Yeah. Forgiveness is a very big concept in the Jewish tradition. But it has to be sought by the perpetrator. It has to be sincerely given.
Ooh.
Okay. And you are the one in control of providing the forgiveness. It doesn't mean that you forget about the insult or what took place, but you can establish a road to move on. So, I know it seems in some of the Christian concepts that you forgive somebody for a major transgression, but again, I think it comes from the same root. It has to be a sincere apology, and that it's not going to happen again, and you have to be able to believe that in order to grant forgiveness.
And I like what you said in the beginning too, also like the onus of responsibility has to also kind of be accepted by the perpetrator too.
Right.
I think there's a lot of like silent forgiveness, like just forgive and forget, kind of move on. And that's what I do not support at all. But yeah, that concept is beautiful. I love that. I know I'll never forgive my brother because he'll never
ask for it. No.
Yeah, he'll never enter that space. There's just I've learned, energies and just boundaries and giving what you give to a person, and he's just an empty hole of Lord.
Sad.
Well, there has to be some true remorse, and nothing that your brother has shown anything like that. So
I think he's misdiagnosed, and I think he's a sociopath from all his behavior. I really do think that he
sounds like it.
Yeah, everything he does is for a result. So I don't think there would even be a way he couldn't have remorse, because the remorse he'd be exhibiting would be for something in return. You know what I mean? It's not. I really do believe. And everything is a spectrum, people, mental health, everything. So it's not like normal and not normal. He is all the way at the end of that, and I like to say, he would have graduated high school in 1999. That was the year that Columbine happened. He was very much that kid that would have exacted that. on his school. You know,
Ugh.
100%. If he had not been kicked out before, he was angry. He was entitled, and he was just, and he was, it was Craigslist days. He could get any weapon he wanted. He was just the perfect recipe for disaster, like I said. But again, there's this spectrum, and I think a lot of people can be saved and touched along that way. It's just that he never really got the right, you know, I don't think the ingredients he was dealing with to begin with weren't quite right, but also just everything along the way, really, it was just going to happen. You know, I think that.
Sorry, I've got to jump off, but Amy, it was such a pleasure
No.
reading the book and hearing from you.
Thank you very much.
Best of luck to you.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Did anyone have any other questions? I feel like I'm not even answering the questions correctly. I'm sorry. I feel like I keep going around and around. And
I think you're doing a great job, and I appreciated the book because I sort of live in this little bubble of, you know, you follow the rules and these are the rules and everything goes smoothly, and it was just so eye-opening to me that everything doesn't go smoothly, and
even if you follow the rules might not follow along with you.
Right,
I mean,
right. And I couldn't help but wonder at the end of the book, so now what happens? You know, I mean, it just
oh gosh, yeah, I'm actually writing an erotica book now, about my healing after divorce, and you know, something about abuse, you know, is a spectrum too. And I found that I've fallen into a relatively abusive marriage, to be honest. So I want to help people realize, you know, I share this book and people can go online and see my beautiful life now. And they're like, wow, you're amazing. Look at all, you've just turned your life all around. But people don't realize that you have to find the tools, seek the tools and that healing. And, you know, sometimes you fall into situations that look similar to other ones. And it takes a lot of hard work. So that is, I'm still working really hard at healing and advocating for myself personally, but also professionally, and for my mom. And Lord, I don't think it'll ever, something that I like to bring to light is that I don't think our journeys as victims and co-victims ever end, you know, with the parole system. Quite honestly, it just will go on forever. So that's.
Amy,
Yeah.
I have a off the wall question.
Yes.
Given the experiences that you have had relative to the criminal justice system and the abuses that you have seen, have you thought about running for office?
Yes.
Thank
Thank
you. There we go.
I actually have. I recently met a man who is running for mayor, and he, I don't know if anyone lives near the city. I probably not, considering the locations of but his name is Ramit Varma, and he is a businessman and a tutor. He had a tutoring company, and you know, he let me just nail him with a bunch of questions. I met him at like a friend's party, and I you know, back to back, and he was just cool as a cucumber. And we started talking, and I told him my family history. And as I was talking to him, I was thinking, maybe I'll run one day. And he goes, you absolutely should. Why wouldn't you? Yeah, no, I've absolutely thought about it, because that's the next step I'm going to be taking professionally, is to seek legal help and just finding out what my personal power is in changing the system, not as an elected official. And then as I kind of try to start doing that, I want to see how stepping into the system as well, probably. Yes.
Are there other questions from, yes, Tony?
Just a comment on things. There was a tragedy in the Valley this weekend.
Yeah.
And when I read about it and then I did a little research on it, I thought the warning signs were there, and so many people are now feeling guilty. The police department never did a welfare check on the kids when they did a psych hold on that mother. I don't believe the 16-year-old really was involved. I think she threatened to kill him as well.
I would say,
And
or who was abused into doing it. Yes, sorry, go on.
and I thought, I just read this book,
Mm.
you know, by you, and then we have this other family tragedy, where the system failed, you know, because
Yeah.
the system, no question, the system failed your brother. He required long-term psychiatric care, and there was never any way to get him into the appropriate programs that would have protected your mother, you, and himself,
Yeah.
because he was a danger to everyone.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's also part of it. Like, police necessarily shouldn't be responding or only police shouldn't be responding to mental health crises, right? Like, there are so many things that need to change. Absolutely. And we see, and it's so sad because we have to see these tragedies to see the holes. And then a lot of the people don't want to talk about the tragedies, the people that are, because it's so heart wrenching, but then we don't learn from them necessarily. And yes, I didn't hear about that until my girlfriend, who actually told me about, her she's the one that her father murdered her mother. By the way, he was a police officer. He was never imprisoned.
Wow.
He was never ever imprisoned, and she was raised by him. Like, that's crazy. Yeah, she told me about that situation, and the first thing I thought about was that 16-year-old, whether he thinks he was in on it or not, he was abused to be in on it. A 16-year-old doesn't have the faculties. And I think somebody asked me earlier, my brother actually committed the crime when he was 25. So technically he's even a child in the system. I mean, it's not juvenile, but you have to be 26 and older. Yeah, that's the threshold. 26. So a 16-year-old might be, I believe in trying some people as if there's as adults, if there's a long enough and it's horrific enough. But this kind of case, it's so shocking and sad that, yes, and she was taken away and then nobody checked the house. I mean, insane. And all these stories are really sad symbols of this system that,
That failed us.
Yeah, failed my brother, sure, but he was given some opportunities. Like, even as a child, he had good mental health care to a certain degree, and he would do the same thing where he swore at doctors, at the lawyers, and the doctors would him. I guess that's not a good enough system anyways either, because there should be the nets to catch those people that follow through those holes. But yeah,
But he manipulated all of that. When he didn't want to go to the doctor, he just threatened the doctor, or he yelled or screamed or whatever. And then they said, we don't want to see you anymore. And your mom took him to a different doctor. I mean, that was all part of the manipulation. He knew what he was doing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. He did. And he learned, and he got really good at what he was doing too over the years, unfortunately. And he was allowed by the system, to be honest. Yeah. But when I say the system, it's hard because it's actually many systems. It's the school system, it's the healthcare system, it's the criminal justice system. It's not, just police or whatnot. In fact, the police were so supportive and lovely to us. It's not like we were, it's just in a system where someone can be killed on a routine stop, or someone like my brother goes through 20 routine visits and nothing happens. There's just, obviously, those are the anomalies that show us that there are problems.
Well, it's a lack of communication between different divisions, different components, or, you pass the buck, it becomes an issue.
And I wonder if that was born from so many different, systems of keeping information. And nowadays everything can be, is updated to a certain degree, but I find people that are involved in these systems, like the social welfare system, and I have friends that are social workers, like, they still think that things are pretty archaic in the way that they even keep their files, their information. So you're probably right. There is just a lack of communication, but also victims. It's hard because we're learning these stories. People are feeling empowered and sharing their stories, but that leaves the onus of responsibility on the victims. And a lot of them just don't want to do it. They're tired and they're healing. And my mom and I were teachers though, so I feel like we're here for it. We're here to educate if we can.
Okay, are there any other questions? We've run over time, but certainly.
Thank you, Amy, for sharing your very personal story, but for your
Yeah.
advocacy and your ability to communicate with others. And that's the key now in terms of your journey and how you want to help others to be aware of these things. And it's great seeing you again.
Thank you. I really appreciate you, Ingrid. I know you helped kind of facilitate this and another meeting, so you're very appreciated.
Thank you.
Take care of your boys. How old are your
Oh,
boys?
a girl and a boy.
I know. Yes. They're watching a movie. That's why they've been quiet for so long. But I have a almost 4th grade girl and a almost first grade boy. So 9 and 6.
Beautiful. Wonderful age.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I live.
Love them.
Just,
You know what? You're blessed with a wonderful aunt.
oh, the
First
best.
friend.
Yes.
And that, that's also so critical.
All right. So thank you again, Amy. And
Thank
this has
you.
been
Thank
very
you so much.
informative.
Very much.
And for those of you who are online, and Amy, I'll send you a link to the upload so you can also get it.
Thank you. And if any of you purchased the book through Amazon or anything, and if you have not yet, I would deeply appreciate a review. Like I said, a couple of them haven't been so kind. So want to offset those. But yeah, thank you again. I really, really appreciate all of you.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.